In high school, I didn't read. I did in elementary school, but by the time the high school rolled around, I'd become one of those students that just watched the movie and tried to come up with a good essay based upon that. That is, until I rediscovered the joys of reading for fun. And the man to reintroduce me to that was Allen Steele. I think it was around 10th grade, I picked up a copy of his novel Ocean Space, which drew me in and I rapidly devoured it. That edition of Ocean Space came with a special preview of his next novel, Chronospace. The title was chosen by the publisher and it bears no relation to the former, which I immediately had to buy and, as luck would have it, had just come out. Chronospace is immaculately written, I read it 3 times, and I've been following Allen Steele ever since. It was he, with those novels, that is responsible for the reader that I am today. Ocean Space and Chronospace were something of anomalies in his writing. He had just finished what is often called the Near Space series, sometimes called the Rude Astronaut series, which is less a series than it is a collection of loosely connected novels that all take place in the same fictional universe, sometimes hundreds of years apart. While Near Space wasn't so much over in his eyes, he was bored with it, and he wrote Ocean Space and Chronospace basically as a hobby. Trying to return to Near Space, he began writing a sequel to his last novel in that series, A King of Infinite Space, but quickly gave up after about 50 pages and trashed it. He was at that moment in his career with a bit of a crisis of meaning, and very nearly gave up science fiction altogether, considering instead becoming a mystery writer under a different name. It was his agent that convinced him to take another look at a concept he'd floated a few times before, that of an interstellar novel. Steele hated the idea of interstellar novels, at least when it came to writing his own. He'd written one short story before that was interstellar. I believe it's called Mecha, which he declares as, quote, his one that, quote, every writer has, in other words, that he's embarrassed by and regrets having written. He's refused to allow to have it reprinted. Incidentally, if anyone out there has a copy of that or could get me one, I'd be eternally grateful. In any case, he approached this next phase of his career with some hesitance, but managed to produce a modern science fiction masterpiece. It's been compared to the great works of Robert A. Heinlein in the Coyote series. Set a few hundred years from now on a Jovian moon around a distant star, it's essentially a retelling of the founding of America, low-class dissidents fleeing an oppressive government to the New World, which becomes a beacon of democracy and hope, and which ultimately clashes with civilizations both fascistic and communistic on Earth. The series consisted of an initial trilogy followed by a few spin-offs, then a duology following up the initial trilogy, followed by a final spin-off and a limited edition novella filling in a gap in the initial trilogy. I own every one of those in hardcover, including the signed and numbered copy of that novella, The River Horses. Steele is a man that knows when to bow out, and has sworn that there will be no more novels within the Coyote universe. However, this merely put him back in the same spot where he was a decade before, with a bit of a miasma as to where to go next. Here we come to Apollo's Outcasts, which, after that long-winded introduction, is the book I'm reviewing today. Apollo's Outcasts largely takes place on the moon, and is Steele's first attempt at a young adult novel. 16-year-old Jamie Barlow was born on the moon and lives on Earth with a debilitating bone gravity disease, until the American president is assassinated and his father, a NASA engineer, is forced to flee the vice president's martial law. Jamie and his sister wind up on a flight to the moon, which is politically safe for them, while now President Lena Chapar escalates towards war with the PSU, or Pacific Socialist Union, dominated by China. Jamie arrives as a part of a group of 6 kids, seeking asylum on the lunar city of Apollo, after a death-defying flight from Earth where VP Chapar even dispatched fighter jets to shoot down the shuttle. Why such extreme measures for a group of kids? Well, it has to do with the last-minute addition to their group, a 16-year-old girl named Hannah, whose presence on the shuttle was paramount, such that Jamie's eldest sister Jan lost her seat and was forced to remain on Earth. Jamie has an initial love-hate relationship with Hannah, because on the one hand she is responsible for Jan being left behind and a presumed arrest as a dissident, but on the other hand, Hannah is clearly set up as the love interest, the attractive girl that 16-year-old Jamie is clearly going to have a thing for. It's not until they reach the moon that we find out that she is the late President Wilford's daughter, fleeing the VP's goons. From here we enter into a bit of a political conflict involving lunar embargoes and all measure of accusations of collusion with the PSU, which VP Chapar is now claiming assassinated President Wilford. I want to begin this next part of the discussion with a massive proviso that you can't and shouldn't try and make political judgments about an author based upon the fiction that they've written. As an author myself, I can attest to the fact that certain viewpoints sometimes need to find themselves expressed, even positively, and even without resolution, to further a particular plot point, or to advance character development. Sometimes a work isn't long enough, or it isn't the right time or place, or such clarifications may undermine the actual theme to counter every viewpoint counter to your own that might come up. Steele himself calls himself fairly opinionated and has said the following regarding his political leanings, specifically referring to what he posts on his Facebook page.
You're never going to see any rants or anything like that. If you want my politics, you can read my books. And even then, good luck, because my political opinions don't. There's no left, right, liberal, conservative, or Republican, Democrat dichotomy involved.
That being said, however, given my extensive knowledge of Steele's work, and having read and watched virtually every interview that I can find of him, I think I can piece together at least a few things, in a general sense. Let's take, for example, his most well-known work, the Coyote series. It begins in a far-right, neoconservative United States called the United Republic, which is authoritarian, pro-surveillance, racist, the target largely Latinos, and fancies itself above the law. Starship Alabama is hijacked by its crew, and they chart their own course to the new world of Coyote. As I mentioned earlier, this basically stands in for the story of the infancy of America. Now, granted, much of the political enemy the colonists have to deal with throughout the series is social collectivism, essentially a stand-in for communism, centered in Havana, though the final novel does bring back the United Republic, which presents the UR as a bunch of right-wing thugs overcome with nostalgia, and are essentially Civil War reenactor bastard fascists. In the series, we see such things as the acceptance of gay relationships, legalized prostitution. The villain of Coyote Horizon turns out to be a Christian priest turned suicide bomber because of the secularization of Coyote. And in the acknowledgement section of Horizon, he actually credits the exploration of these religious and secular themes to Richard Dawkins' The God Delusion. 2 women throughout the series wind up with unplanned pregnancies, and both are presented with the option of abortion, though both decline it as it's against their beliefs, and there's no comment on the issue's politicization. Allen Steele was born and raised in Tennessee, which is not known for being a particularly liberal place, although most of his writing career he's lived in Whately, Massachusetts. In interviews, he mentioned how he used to use marijuana. I would hazard a guess that Steele is probably not supporting Ted Cruz for president. Just as in Coyote, so here are we presented with a picture of a far right-wing power trying to thug their way through geopolitics and having it backfire spectacularly. President Wilford, we're told, was a moderate, presumably a Republican, though party names are not mentioned, who chose Lena Chapar to appease the far right wing of his party. Think John McCain. This is Steele's first young adult novel, and technical, scientific, and political details have been dumbed down to that level as a result. I'm not sure why Steele chose to go young adult on this one. I mean, it's not exactly as though his writing is generally vulgar. There's very little sex or graphic violence throughout much of his work, and you might find a dozen or so F-bombs throughout his 20 novels. It wouldn't be a huge leap for him to go YA, but still, the deliberate changing of the writing style, simplifying things for a younger audience, but it was a curious choice for him. I'm not sure why he did it. I'm not generally a fan of YA, and although Apollo's Outcasts has all my favorite Steelisms, it is certainly no exception when it comes to my feelings for the genre. For example, Steele sets up an entirely manufactured and overused trope of the teen love triangle. Hannah, once the group is on the moon, throws herself at Jamie in the way that any teen boy would dream of, but through his awkwardness and self-centeredness pushes her away, instead favoring a loony, moon resident, named Nicole. It's like, you're a dumbass, and this sort of needless drama is always contrived in young adult. That being said, it's an enjoyable romp. This is still classic Steele, and I'd highly recommend checking out his writing in general, even if YA isn't your thing. Steele is strong in the sense that his novels are very technically researched and detailed, but he's also got good quality characters in the foreground, something that usually is lost in technical sci-fi. Having read this, my first Steele novel since the Coyote series many years ago, I very much wanted to go back and reread Coyote. It caused a great sense of nostalgia in me. If perhaps only the main trilogy and the Chronicles. Perhaps one day, when I finally get the time, that's what I'll do. Steele also has another new novel out, VS Day, and another one, Arkwright, that's on its way. And he's currently now secured the rights to reboot the old Captain Future stories, which he's been quite fond of, as mentioned many times. And that he is writing now. As an author myself, I can attest to the fact that certain viewpoints sometimes need to find themselves expressed. Even positively. Would you shut up, you fucking Windows 10? I'm trying to read the goddamn thing here.